Uh, First item on the agenda is to approve the May 6th, 2021 and June 30th, 2021 meeting minutes. I'd entertain a motion.
I so move. I so second.
Clerk. Love it.
First item on the agenda is to approve the May 6th, 2021 and June 30th, 2021 meeting minutes. Motion.
Love it. Mayor Brunch did the first.
Okay,
Now we're set. Like you were in there.
Once again, say your name so we can record it. That'll be great. You good now? Still? Love technology. All right. Next on the item, public comments. Anyone here that would like to address us for public comment? Seeing none, we'll move to number 3, North Lakeshore Area Study conclusion. John Elliott, all yours.
All right, I'll stay sitting so that the Zoom can zoom on me. If you can pull up the PowerPoint. So in front of you is an executive summary of what the North Lakeshore Area Study concluded on. I'm going to go through and talk about what we did, what we learned, what worked, and what we learned that didn't work. I will say at the beginning of this study, part of our goal was to build a consensus on how to move large volumes of traffic through the study area. In the end, we did not reach that consensus. And so, so as I go through this, I'll explain that. And then also I will talk about next steps. So as we move forward, next slide. So first off, this study, we partnered with UDOT and used a new process that they had called solutions development. It was used for corridor studies in the past. And this was not just a corridor study, this was a very large regional study. And so we had to adjust it to do so. The process is used to listen to what are the values of the area, what are the regional, what's the regional perspective, what do people need to get through this area, what do they see as what's good, okay? And then also we looked at more than just transportation. A lot of times as transportation planners, that's our big thing. We focus in on transportation. We don't look at this level, we don't look at things like wetlands or why do people like living in this place and that kind of thing. Next slide. Oh, okay. So first, let me start with what was the purpose of the study. I mentioned travel demand. Pioneer Crossing today already has freeway volumes, about 40,000, 45,000 trips a day. That's what Bangor is carrying right now. And the latest speeds on it are around the 70 mile an hour for the 85th percentile, which just means the majority of people drive that speed. By 2050, volume is projected to be 100,000 daily trips on that corridor. If we have a lake bridge over Utah Lake going to the Provo and Orem area, if we don't have a lake bridge, it'd be about 150,000 would be the demand through that area. Next. Sorry, I know you told me you could do it. Okay, another reason why we did the study is population growth. This is amazing information here. This just came off the press. So this is census data. It's not the decennial census data that we're waiting on for redistricting and so forth, but it is census estimates that the census came out with this year for 2020. So this is showing the growth by region in the county. So in the last 10 years, the northwest area of the county, which is Eagle Mountain, Saratoga, and Lehigh, grew by almost 65,000 people. To put that in comparison, the other 3 areas, the north area, which is American Fork to Linden, grew less than 20,000. The south area, which is Springville South, about 24, and the central 26. And so there's a reason why there's a lot of focus in this area when it comes to transportation infrastructure and so forth, is that growth. Next slide. I'm sorry, I can do it. Okay, and then this is the next 3 decades. This is what is projected to happen in the area. So again, the northwest area is projected still to grow the most. These numbers are growth, they're not the actual total populations of these areas. The South County also grows a lot, one caveat there is it's the last decade that the South County, so 2040 to 2050, when it really starts turning on. And the assumption there was that the Benjamin area would start turning on. As you know, we Envision Utah just did the Valley Vision scenario study, and part of that was saying more growth up north and less down south. So that's something as we develop our next regional transportation plan, we're going to have to look at will growth adjust. And again, you're both for that. and you think about the last 10 years, the South didn't grow like we thought it would. And I think Spanish Fork, you focused a lot of your growth there. I live in Elk Ridge. We had as many homes built as all of Payson in the last 10 years. So there were some hot spots and some pretty cool stuff. Next slide. Okay, so as part of the study, the first step that the consultants did was to identify the context. And so we had numerous online public engagement platforms. This started before COVID. In fact, try to do a big study and involve the public in the middle of COVID. It was interesting, but we received over 7,000 comments, which is incredible for a study like this. Out of those comments, the circles on the side is what we heard were the most important issues for people. Obviously, transportation is an issue. The thing we heard over and over is, I can't get from point A to point B, that kind of thing. I remember, now it's been about 15 years ago now, but we were going to move, my family's going to move to Eagle Mountain, to the ranches, and we put money down on a lot, and something happened. The developer wasn't working with the city nicely, and so we didn't end up doing it. But I remember driving out there, it took me 20 minutes from Warren. I think it's 45 minutes now to do that. So I am glad I don't live out there. I'm sure there are people who do, but I'm glad I don't have to commute. So let's see, next slide. Oh, and social, I'll just say the other, social and cultural. Basically, most people say they really like where they live. They like the family feeling was what we heard. They like the safety. They feel like it's a safe place to live. And that's part of their concern with growth is do we manage it right to keep it with that type of feeling? Defining the guiding principles. So as part of the development solutions process, they come up with looking at what are the most important principles that should guide the study as they go. And so create a reliable connected transportation system. Again, that was number one, protect and preserve open space in the environment. There's a lot of farmland and a lot of wetlands in this area. And I think people were saying we want to keep it that way. Now, part of it is people say that because they don't want more growth, right? But other is there's, you know, the Utah Lake, we heard a lot that people want that to be preserved or improved. And so
one comment. I remember living here in 1985 when Geneva Steel went down for a year before they got purchased, and everybody was concerned because there were no jobs, and the housing values went down 15 to 20%, and everybody was really upset because there were no jobs, no places for youth to go, and you know, just a really downturn in our economy. We're very concerned. Now we're peaking at the opposite, and everybody's concerned like we've got too many jobs, too many people, too much growth. And it's just interesting.
It is. The 80s was one of the worst economic times here in the valley. I came here at the end of the 80s, and it was just starting to pick up. So, okay, promote well-being of residents, maintain culture, improve accessibility to employment, goods, and services. That goes right back to the reliable transportation system. And then collaborate regionally. What we heard there is they wanted us to work together more. They sort of sensed that there were one group is against another or so forth. And so this was taken as to be used as we evaluated scenarios that were developed from what we heard from the public and the stakeholders. Next, they identified the needs. And again, they sort of relate to what we just discussed, managing growth, coordinating land use, increase the capacity of the roadway system, expansion of transportation, develop active transportation, acknowledge the environmental and visual safety. And so again, these were all used, then put into a weighting matrix so that as we develop the scenarios, we could see how they work. And then the last step is identify solutions. Solutions were identified from the stakeholder. 3 scenarios were developed, and I'll show you those here in a second. Each was evaluated and ranked to measure the impact and performance. So scenario 1, this was basically looking at transit. Can we serve this area with transit and not have to continue to build roads? We looked at 2 different angles of this. The blue dashed lines are showing 3 different transit lines that we modeled. All of these were BRT or light rail. They looked at them both. What we concluded on the transit side is that we just don't have the densities either now or even by 2050 to make those kind of facilities work well. If you think about the I-15 core, and we have commuter rail, and we're now looking at BRT, those densities along I-15 are just constant as you go up that corridor, and they go to major destinations. Out in this area, we have a lot of single family and larger lot type development with some clusters of higher density development. We also tried to add development at stations, meaning as we modeled these, we had to put stations in the traffic model. And we put higher densities in those areas to try to see how much more would we have to do to make this work. And we just couldn't make it work. And so what we found is it doesn't really work right around the station. It's the fact that you got density even further away where people kiss and ride or park and ride and that kind of thing. So we couldn't get transit to work. We still, in the long range transportation plan, we show core bus route service out here in the next 10 to 20 years, which is basically higher level of service, 15-minute service. And it does perform well for this area. So part of the conclusion is that we don't want to give up on planning for transit out here because one, the futures can change. We do change as we go, we evolve and urbanize even more. So, and the cities, I think, are still planning for transit. But then also as we plan, maybe we need to try to see if there's other transit friendly development that we can try to put along these routes that we are planning for. The other portion that we modeled on this was looking at a 20% work at home. As we know, COVID made us all ask who's going to work at home and that kind of thing. We tested it and wow, it works really well. Nobody's going to work. We don't need to do much more. So our concern was 20%. We didn't have any data or any kind of trends or anything to support a 20%, other than we're in the middle of a COVID, right? And so that number right now, work at home along the Wasatch Front, is at 7%. In the last decade, it jumped from 4 to 7%, which is almost unlike anywhere else in the country. The national average is about 4%. Places like Chicago and New York are around 4%. So we're not sure why it jumped to 7, but it did. And so to now go clear up to 20, we just couldn't support it. We're fearful that if we did that and then that reality didn't happen, we'd be under planning. So another 5 years from now, if we really do come to the conclusion that COVID has changed this in a drastic way, then you know, we can obviously continue to, we plan every 4 years, right, through our planning process. So, and so this scenario was eliminated for further review to actually go through the different weighting exercise. Second scenario, Pioneer Crossing Freeway. And this is the red line on the map. So 100,000 trips a day in 2050. And as I said before, if we don't get the bridge at the south, it's in the 150 range. This satisfies travel demand, good spacing of regional facilities. So we talk about the grid system. Our grid system is freeways and arterials and collectors. And this does allow us to have that proper spacing. It's the best overall traffic performance. And UDOT already owns the facility. So that's part of the thinking there. So we moved that on for further review.
So Sean,
Mhm.
go back to this one. So you got the Vineyard Freeway arterial, and that's been on there for 10, 15 years.
Right, as an arterial.
Are we ever going to fund that? Do you know?
So UDOT is, I believe, just starting up the environmental for the arterial route. This study looked at arterial and if it's a parallel freeway to I-15. By 2035, we're showing I-15 failing through this area at its current configuration. And so the question is, do we build a parallel facility like a legacy highway? the current regional transportation plan, that's what we have in there. But we also note that improvements to I-15 still could occur, like frontage road system or collector distributor. There needs to be more study of, do we do it to Vineyard? Yeah, yeah. And so this study concluded that it works really well, meaning it clears up congestion on I-15. Again, freeways are supposed to be about every 5 miles in an urban area. That's about Provo and Orem to their ends, and we only got one down the middle. So the next one, scenario 3, this was the last scenario we looked at, Pony Express as a freeway. As you can see, it's the orange line. We looked at on Pony Express, 1900 South Lehigh as a solid line. And then we also looked at 2 lake crossing scenarios where there would be a bridge or a causeway type facility right off of the shore. We eliminated, at least for further review on the environmental and impacts, we eliminated the lake scenarios, mainly because with talking with UDOT Environmental, they said that they would be eliminated through the process of the Army Corps. In 2050, about 70,000 trips a day versus the 100 on Pioneer Crossing. The main difference is you don't have as much connectivity with Lehigh, and you also Pioneer is closer to where people live, right? And so that's why there'd be a difference. But it does satisfy the need, meaning, yeah, 70,000 doesn't satisfy the 100,000, but the other arterials in the city, they get a little more overloaded, but it does work. And so when you look at just traffic, both of these work. The other conclusion that we saw on this is that having Pioneer less than a mile away from, I'm sorry, Pony less than a half a mile away from Pioneer, you end up, Pioneer becomes underutilized. You're carrying about 15,000 trips a day because you have 2 facilities that are sort of like each other, but one's a little better, and so everybody's using that facility. Okay, so on the technical review of these 2 scenarios, when we look at things like open space, Pioneer Crossing has about half the impact that Pony route does. And again, this is on land, the Pony route. Wetlands, 15 to 19 acres versus 23 to 29. Special soils, none on Pioneer, 4 on Pony. And then the other 2, as you can see, they're both, when it comes to environment, the Pony is much more disruptive. And then the other thing that we learned is that on Pony, that the resource agencies would require us to look at other corridor options first, because if you can show there's a least damaging alternative, then they require you to go with that alternative. Land use impacts that were identified on Pioneer, 31 to 39 structures versus 60 to 72. I think the main difference there is that all Pioneer already has a wide amount of right-of-way, whereas Pony is much narrower, so you're taking out even more structures to put something that wide through. Future residential is just looking at zoning and the parcels that could be impacted. Commercial, again, there's not many commercial down on either. And I will say these numbers were taken about a year ago. I know Lehigh has approved a few more buildings that are going on. And then industrial is not much of an issue there. So the study recommendation, and again, we know we do not have consensus. Lehigh is not in favor of this conclusion, at least the freeway conclusion. So widen Pioneer Crossing to 6 lanes in the near term. Already today, it's at its capacity, and UDOT is looking at putting funding toward that, or they're trying to identify funding to widen it to 6 lanes and still keep it as an expressway like it is now. And then in the future, convert to a grade separated freeway, build Pony Express Parkway as a 4-lane local arterial, and continue to study Vineyard or the I-15 and what to do in those areas.
I object to that. Continue to study Vineyard. It's been studied. We just need to act.
It hasn't been studied as a freeway and what that does to I-15 or vice versa. This study looked at it as a freeway, but the decision to, do we do it to I-15 or do we do it to Vineyard, that still needs to be.
diameter of the freeway, is that kind
The connector. What do you-
well, it's always been called the district connection.
I think that was just the naming they
And
used
they
to
talk
say it's
about
connecting.
three
the freeway.
lanes each way,
Mhm.
with landscaping down the middle.
Right,
So freeway, 3 lanes each way with landscaping.
right, and interchange. So instead of having signals. Um, So the benefits of this study process, we do understand what regionally people are saying to us. 7,000 comments, we learned a lot. And, big public process, stakeholder process. I did identified environmental and land use impacts, and we have a better understanding of what the Army Corps will permit. UDOT has studied through this area many times with Mountain View and Pioneer, and we understand their process a little bit better. What didn't work is that this was meant for corridor studies, and it didn't fit well in this large area study, in our opinion. We developed scenarios again by regional input, but we didn't get the municipalities on board, is where we ended. We did not, as I said, gain a consensus with municipalities. So the last slide, next steps. UDOT to seek funding for Pioneer Crossing to widen to 6 lanes as an expressway, so continue having intersections. The locals seek corridor funding for Pony Express Parkway as a local arterial. And then as we work through the regional transportation process, which is just starting, we will continue to search for solutions for how to move that large movement of traffic through this area. And try to continue to work for consensus on how to do that.
When was Pioneer Crossing built?
Pioneer Crossing, when was it built? Oh my memory's going.
That was-
It's got to be about 7 years, isn't it? Was it open before I-15, the corridor? I think it was all right around that time, so probably about 2011-ish.
So here we are 10 years later. And we've got a wide one.
Right, I know. Well, and you go back to the growth figures, when you had 64,000 people in just 10 years, it put a lot of pressure in that area.
But we didn't build big enough at the time. That's amazing.
Yeah,
It's Elon's fault. It must be.
You,
and if you want our website, you can go to mountainland.org, North Lakeshore, and
talk about when is the bridge? First, and then the bridge.
so the bridge to Provo and Warm area, it's in phase 3 of the regional transportation plan, so 2040 to 2050. It carries about 80,000 trips a day by then, and so it does well. But again, this is the big question mark: if will we ever build it? Right? I mean, half the people say, "Yeah, build it tomorrow," and the other are like, "You're never going to
But
build
if
that."
you build it, you complete the grid system.
Mhm.
And we know that if we have a grid system, that it keeps our travel times lower.
Right.
And it does much better for distributing traffic.
Right.
So it really does need to be built.
Right, and we did move it into a funded phase of the plan this last time, meaning we're putting more attention on it. So.
Sean, if I may, so, we pay pretty close attention, as Sean already said, the Lehigh is not supportive. There's elements of the study we would support.
Right.
We're fine with the 2 additional lanes, one each direction on the crosswalk. We think it's a great idea to allocate some land acquisition for future transit. Realizing that the numbers may not support that now. Land acquisition is very important. I mean, we support that. Any good connection to Pony Express through Lehigh, we would also support that. What we don't support for a number of reasons that I'm not going to go through all this right now is turning Pioneer Crossing to a freeway. Don't agree with the numbers. See it quite differently, but we plan to have a critical discussion.
Okay.
On those numbers, but we believe them to be. But my biggest concern about the study is there's no real financial analysis. We've got brand new developments all the way along Pioneer Crossing. It's going to be completely built out. And we're talking about taking what 150 corridor with 350 with two areas for interchange. So you're looking at 750 wide. We're talking about destroying brand new developments, through that area. And honestly, I'll just say this one thing, I'll shut up. I challenge anybody to find another city in the state of Utah that's bisected by three different freeways. That, just one. And anybody who has their city bisected by one freeway, the problems that come. Just consider three freeways.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Any other questions for Sean? All right. Okay. I need a little housekeeping. So this meeting is live streamed. So the owl picks up all your side conversations and I will be blackmailing you after. So speak up when you give a motion, say your name. There's no COG meeting then after this, and Mayor Frugal has to be excused. So, all right, the next one will be item 4, corridor preservation, and Sean Seeger's going to take that one.
Mayor, I'm going to try to fill in. Let me just give you a brief overview of the vehicle registration fee that funds the corridor preservation program for Utah County. We call it the local corridor preservation program. There's also a state corridor preservation program that UDOT operates. This is the one that's in Utah County. You guys have access to it. We do an update every year. Make sure you guys know what's going on. Tell you the fund balance. Encourage you to apply for corridor preservation. Just has to be one of the roads that's on our RTP, the Regional Transportation Plan, and you're good to go. So Jim's telling us the 21 beginning balance is about 7.5 million. Purchased 0 properties in 21 so far. Last 5 years, we've spent about 8 million. A couple special programs. We have one in Orem where we've authorized 3 million and we've spent 2.8 of that. I think it's on 16. So we're down good there. Number of properties that we have for right away. Now we're holding 20 properties. Cities currently in the process of declaring some properties available for purchase through the connector road. And so these were parcels that we purchased about 10 years ago, right, Mayor? And 11 years ago. And we've since then built the Murdoch connector road. We did a grand opening on that, right?
Yep. And thanks to everybody for helping. Nice.
It's an example of what happens to that leftover property.
We've already surplus the 2, actually the 3 stars on the west state. Those were just surpluses. So that should, 45-day process. So that's awful. The next 2.
So you can see how the lot used to come like this. Here's the road coming through the back of that house that used to be there. We purchased those houses that Highland City did, or Utah, I think it's Highland City did.
We did, but we used to.
That's right. Purchases in the county funds. And now the road has been put in, and now you've surplus these 3 properties. You're going to surplus those. When they surplus those properties, that money then comes back to the county into that corridor. Check on that.
My home address.
So those monies come back in, and we have that happening on, going to happen on 1600 North. That's going to be a state route now. So when UDOT builds that project, all those monies come back to fix the county corridor preservation. Mayor Childs, that project on 1600 South, 2700 North, would become that piece of property we bought. Once UDOT starts to build that, we get our interchange there in a couple months. In a couple months, then those monies will come back into the corridor preservation fund. So that 7 million is going to go up. And if you've got projects that corridor preservation that we can purchase, willing seller on that map, then please come and talk to Jim Price in our office. If you need Jim's telephone number, let me know. I can even tell you right now if you want. Get a hold of me or Sean Elliott or any of us here. Unless there are
Right.
questions.
Any questions for Sean? All right, thanks, Sean. Okay, let's go down to number 5, tip modification, Spanish Fork 800 North intersection. Bob?
Thank you. So we got a couple of modifications today. Two of them, one of them is Spanish Fork. So we have our original project is the 800 East, 800 East intersection. That's this intersection right here. This is US 6. If you're heading down to Moab, this is the Arby's, McDonald's, if you're aware of that intersection that we're talking about. So the original project was selected in 2018. It was awarded about $2.5 million. And if you ever tried to get through this area, this intersection was kind of a mess. It's close to US 6. So the original project made adjustments to this intersection to make it work. And it also integrated in with the intersection here at US 6. Zooming in though, one thing that once the project was completed, one thing they realized is the lanes on the east side of US 6 don't really match up and work anymore with what's happening on the west side that they just completed. So, and basically what they were need to try and do is acquire some property through this area in front of the Arby's, and this is kind of the old abandoned sort of food for less. Kmart, that's right. And add some lands and be able to have some space to get things lined up over here. Well, the original project has $584,000 remaining on the project. Spanish Fork is requesting that the remaining funds be used to modify the opposite side of the intersection. So essentially they're asking to modify the scope, increase the scope under the original amount that was given to the project. Spanish Fork has agreed to fund any cost overruns this new scope element would bring. So basically we're just expanding the scope from one side of the highway to the other to make it work better with excess funds that were on the original project. There is a proposed motion. It is an action item. Is there any questions I can answer on this project? Again, it's basically a scope addition of this new project.
No questions, I'd entertain a motion.
I move that open.
Motion by Mayor Mann and second by Mayor Larson. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead. So the next one. This is another Spanish Fork. So we're going to two separate projects here. So I'll try and help you keep it straight. So first project we have is the Center Street widening. This project was selected in 2016. It was awarded a little over $5 million. The project was to widen Center Street between 900 East and US 6. This is the Tesoro gas station just up the top of the hill, that first light after the last intersection we're talking about. So up the hill, heading south again, like you're going to Moab. That's this right here. So the project was to widen this section from 3 lanes to 5. It's 5 lanes all the way down that way. The project ended up costing a little over $2 million more than originally thought. Some of that was due to some minor scope modifications and some right of way that they need to purchase that we originally didn't think needed to be purchased. And also the Tesoro gas pumps needed to be moved in order to accommodate this project. So the cost went up significantly. So put that in your back pocket for a minute. The same intersection again, this is the same intersection we're talking about. In 2018, there was a project selected to construct a pedestrian undercrossing under US 6. So we showed you the junior high right here. All these kids in this neighborhood over here needed to walk across US 6 to get to school. The Spanish Fork came in and was awarded a project to build that pedestrian undercrossing. Since that project was awarded, though, cost estimates increased to around $6.5 million significantly. But also Nebo School District has modified their school boundaries, and so they're no longer requiring students to walk across this busy intersection. So we have the two projects put together. So the request of Spanish Fork is basically they want to remove this pedestrian undercrossing that is no longer necessary, and take the $1.7 million that were awarded to the undercrossing project and apply it to the cost overruns that came with the Center Street widening project. This is something that our TIP policies do allow. TAC approved it. There was a little bit of trepidation with taking a project away and just moving that money to another project. But our policy does allow it. MAC staff recommends that we go forward with this. It's not something that we love to do, but we keep it in there because we see that there are definitely times when we need to be able to do it. So basically what we're asking again in synopsis is this project, a pedestrian undercrossing, is no longer needed to be removed from the TIP, and the funds that were awarded to it would be transferred to the Center Street project that was over. There still is about a remaining $300,000 over budget on that project that Spanish Fork says they're going to take care of.
Every time.
But anyways, that is the motion then, is to remove this project and transfer the funds to this project. Are there any questions that I can answer on this proposal?
I see none. I'd entertain a motion.
I'll make the motion, prove that the US 6 undercrossing project be eliminated from the TIP and the $1,790,435 be transferred to the Center Street project.
Second, Mayor Westmoreland.
Motion by Mayor Wright, second by Mayor Westmoreland. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
All right, I've got one more for you. So this is the 2022 TIP approval. So this may be a little bit rudimentary for everybody in this room, since we do TIP a lot, but just to run through it, the Metropolitan Planning Organization, the MPO or MAC, has a responsibility for improving the transportation improvement program for the area. This is how this body, local government, works together to inform and decide how transportation is planned and programmed in our area. We have the long range plan, which is kind of like your city's general plan. And then the TIP is basically how projects are funded. It's where things actually start getting built. The TIP lists transportation projects and programs within the MPO for fiscal years 22 through 26. Conceptual projects are listed through 27. All regional projects, regardless of the selecting agency and funding agency, must be approved by the MPO committees to be listed in the TIP. You all know, I think, and recognize that this is how we spend money on transportation. The Transportation Commission also has the STIP, which this is a piece of the STIP that goes in. Decisions that the Transportation Commission generally does comes back to us, and those that we make go back to them. Commissioner, did I say anything wrong? Oh, great. Those of you that have looked at our TIP, this is our TIP application that you list. It has an interactive map, shows the number of projects, has a listing of projects. You can look in here and get a bunch of information about the projects, when they're funded, how much money they have, et cetera, et cetera. We actually were commended by FHWA when we were about 2 years ago for this application. We're actually looking to do some major modifications to it in the short term. But if you have specific information you're looking for in the TIP, that our website there, that application is the place to go. So you all are aware that MAG has funds that we spend, and we typically select projects every 2 years. This last year, we added a bunch of projects to the TIP using MAG funds. This year is our off year. Where we are not adding our projects to the TIP, but UDOT, UTA, et cetera, they are adding projects to the TIP. Our last meeting that we had at the end of June, I believe it was, we had that quick meeting because there were several projects that UDOT felt like we needed to get in. Those are some of those new projects that UDOT was adding to the TIP and therefore adding to the STIP so they can get off and running right now. These are a few additional projects local projects in Utah County that UDOT is adding money to or doing. State Street and Pleasant Grove, this is the gap between Pleasant Grove and American Fork where it's only 5 lanes and this will make it 6. Springville Spanish Fork, 1600 north or 1600 south of 2700 north. We're gonna have to name that road or something. So when we're talking, I don't want to pick my anyways, this is an additional $35 million to actually build that road east to west. There was $35 million added to the Orem 1600 North project. This is from widening 1600 North and Orem from State Street all the way to the freeway. Orem's been working on this project for years, so this is a big boon for them. Foothill Boulevard Environmental. This is actually looking at Foothill Boulevard, starting the environmental process. This is kind of that extension of the Mountain View freeway down through the city of Saratoga Springs. I know it's very needed and looked for a project. I don't have a date here because I wasn't able to pin down a UDOT staff person on when the funds are available. I believe it was 2022, but it's not in an outer year, it's in an earlier year, and I just couldn't tell you the exact time. We have a new signal at SR 114 and 200 North in Provo, added some money to, and then some money on a Redwood Road between Village Parkway and Grandview in Saratoga Springs. So these are just some of the projects. These are kind of the big highlight projects that we didn't talk about last time we met. These are just some of those highlight projects that UDOT is adding money to. We appreciate UDOT for putting stuff in our area, spending money here. So back to the TIP, we need to approve the TIP so our TIP can go to the Transportation Commission, so the Transportation Commission can adopt the STIP and everything gets pulled together. We have held a 30-day public comment period that started on July 1st and it closed August 3rd, more than 30 days. We received no regionally significant comments, which basically means we received no comments that would require us to do air quality conformity again. With that, basically, once we add projects every 2 years, but we need to adopt the TIP every year. This is the time that we adopt the TIP. Basically adopting the stuff that UDOT's adding, our process, et cetera, et cetera. Are there any questions I can answer about the 2022 TIP?
All right, seeing no questions, I'd entertain a motion.
I'd like to make a motion.
Approve the 2022 TIP presented, Mayor Miller.
Second that.
Wow,
What happened?
you got stopped. Motion by Mayor, which one did first? Miller first and then Child. Okay, there we go.
We appreciate this.
Yeah. All in favor, say aye. Any opposed? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
There's a road called the Tristan Road.
The what one?
The Tristan. 27.
Yeah,
I think of more Santana.
Yeah. No, I said that.
Yeah.
I told
Those
you.
guys who used to race. Yeah. That'd be a good one. All right, let's move down to number 8, Utah Valley Express Bus Rapid Transit. No fair solution update. Andrew.
Yes, thank you very much. Is around which is part of the agreement on the fourth quarter set.
We have-
Yeah, no.
Okay, so we talked about this ad nauseum quite a while earlier in the year. We thought that we would have a robust discussion on this in August. And I'm reminded of when we first came about with some of the software programs like WordPerfect and other things. And you could just call toll free and talk to customer support, and they would tell you how to like bold something or move something or put a line on something. And then the response after a while and the cost associated with customer support, the response was read the manual. So as I was doing more research on BRT, I went back and looked at the agreements which were already in place. And it's not what I was expecting. There's an agreement that already covers this. So this is the BRT waterfall. So in 2016, we borrowed money from the third quarter cent to be paid back by the first quarter cent, the second quarter cent on BRT. Then in 2018, the county enacted the fourth quarter cent, which had a portion of the funding for UTA. Commissioner Ivy and Commissioner Graves were the ones who voted for the fourth quarter cent, and they said that one of the conditions was that they wanted to have an interlocal agreement on how UTA would spend that fourth quarter cent, basically taking over the debt of the third quarter cent on BRT. And I can go for super detail with this if anybody wants it, but I'm not going to do it tonight. So the first thing that was required was to start making the bond payments. The second thing was to pay for operations and maintenance. This that I handed out to you is actually that section of the interlocal agreement. The second thing, so once UTA started making the bond payments, then they started paying for the operations and maintenance. As you're aware, in the last 3 years, we've had CMAQ funding to subsidize the operation and maintenance of the BRT system for about $600,000 a year. That could only be spent over a 3 to 5 year period, and so we're approaching the end of that CMAQ funding. So we're looking at how can we fund BRT and keep it free fare. Again, as I was doing research, I read the agreement, and the agreement actually says that the second thing is UTA shall pay for the operation and maintenance, the actual cost of operation and maintenance of BRT, with that 40% of the fourth quarter that goes to UTA. So it's kind of a new point because there was an agreement in 2018 that says UTA has to pay for it. And then the next step in the waterfall was to pay back past bond payments, pay back past operation maintenance, pay back past interest charges. So the $5 million bond against the third quarter cent, but those payments were only made for about 2 or 3 years, and then the fourth quarter cent came into place and replaced the third quarter cent. So UTA only had to pay back those first 3 years, then they assumed the remainder of that bond agreement. And with the fourth quarter cent increases in sales tax that we've seen, they're doing number 1, they're doing number 2, they're doing number 3, they're doing number 4, they're working on number 5. They should have all of that past payments, those 3 years of past payments of third quarter cent should be paid back probably within a year, in addition to that they've taken over all of the other costs associated with it, and then they will have some reserve account to pay for the bond off early and start new service. So this is the bond, and you can see it was about $3 million a year, and after about the third year, UTA took that up with the fourth quarter cent to the third quarter cent, and they've continued to pay that plus paying back about 12 million of the 18 million that was spent. This just shows the tentative budget for the quarter since section 59122216. A portion of that should be going to BRT. 5% of that quarter should be going about 1.6 million. And then they've got the 40% of the fourth quarter that also goes to BRT as part of that agreement with the county commissioners for them to enact that fourth quarter set. And you all are receiving also 40% of the fourth quarter set. That's probably going directly into your B&C Rev Fund category. That's a good question. So what happened is the county enacted it in December, and then it takes 3 months for its region to get that out. So it was about April-ish when they got that out, and then for them to start having retailers charge that extra percent. And then it takes about 3 months after that. So you should start seeing funding in October, November of 2018. You should have started seeing that funding come in. And so it will come on a monthly basis from the tax directly to their account. It doesn't go to the county. And the county does about 25.
The 2020 number, that one current.
So this was their budget for 2021, which is a calendar year for the county, and what they proposed.
2020.
Yeah,
That was actually collected.
no, it was higher. Yeah. So that's not an actual, that was still the current budget through that. This was done in November of 2020. But we're seeing substantial increases in the quarter since in the all sales tax. But Sean was telling me that Midway, Amazon, they get more sales tax from Amazon than all the other retailers in the city combined.
Imagine that.
This is just that waterfall like different government. So again, we go back to looking at this. There was that previous agreement where the third quarter set would pay for it, but now it's moved to the fourth quarter set. Now this is a UTA analysis that they looked at the cost of BRT and running BRT. Previous to BRT being there, you get BRT. They had the 830 route. When we got approval for BRT and the cost associated with it, we said that you're already paying for the 830 route, which kind of went about that same area. So you deduct that cost from BRT because you've already got that figured in, and then it's just that additional cost. So we see in this first column the cost of BRT, we're subtracting out that baseline service, and then that total cost and the total adjusted cost of BRT is 3.6 million. And as we talked to UTA, the increase in the fourth quarter is enough to pay for that system, the operation and maintenance of the system. Again, it pays for the bond payment, pays for the operation and maintenance of the system completely, as well as going down this list of the other fees, the past bond payments, etc., in this waterfall. And we will be able to do this quicker than expected. And so then the question arose yesterday of an MPO finance, well, how much does it cost to actually put in the system to collect fares, and what would that be? And I've got numbers over here. We can go into that if you like, or I can meet with you individually. But essentially, we have 80% of the riders on the UVX system is you or BYU or other pass holders. So there's only about 20% who are riding it without a pass. So they would be this fair paying customers. And then on based off of the number of boardings, 20% of that being fair paying customers, and we know from peer reviewed research articles that when you add a fare onto a bus system, you reduce that ridership about 40%. So we take that 20%, reduce it by 40%, multiply that by $2.50 per person. It ends up being, and then there's also about 20 cents on every dollar is accounting and collecting that revenue. So we're only about 80% of the revenue associated with that. It's about 600,000 a year if we put a fee in place, and it's between 1.1 and 1.3 million dollars put in the infrastructure. We put in conduit just in case we need to, because it's easier to put in the sprinkler pipes while we're doing the construction. But to get the equipment to actually do it, it's about 1.1 to 1.3. Let's just say it's 1.2. So it would take 2 years, 100% of the fare box collection for 2 years just to pay for that system. And then, according to UTA discussions with Trustee Acer, saying they're looking at probably by that time it would be obsolete and we would have to replace it with the current system. So then again, it's kind of one of those things of the cost to collect the fares and the reduction in ridership has to be balanced. But bottom line is there's already an agreement in place that requires third portion of the fourth quarter set to pay for operations. So, BRT UVX line that was put in place as a condition for the government to put in that fourth quarter. So that's it in a nutshell. This is one of my favorite topics. So I'm happy to spend hours and hours with any of you that want to.
Fundamentally, don't be wrong, like free forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. You know, how many people in Eagle Mountain ride it? How many people in Sonoma ride it? Like, I'm sure you could convince me, but just give me the clip notes. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah, we.
Yep.
You know, fundamentally, this is like free forever.
Yeah, that's a great.
Let's do something, but.
That's a good question. And what we have is we have that corridor that UVX runs down is one of the most congested corridors, but it's also the goose that laid the golden egg. So we get a substantial amount of revenue through sales tax along that corridor. As it gets congested, there's less people that will travel on that corridor and less people that will spend money on sales tax. I was a charge a fare proponent for a long time. And just as we were getting into starting up the BRT project, we had some citizens who were opposed to BRT, and they went to the state Supreme Court. Anyway, I was talking to one of them, and I was saying that this is a congestion mitigation issue. We're trying to take whether the BYU students, GBU students, or the general public who are driving cars along that corridor, we're trying to get them into a bus. And the fare, we know that when we charge the fare, 50% reduction in ridership. So by not having a fare, we have increased ridership, which is less cars on there. And so I was talking to this opponent of BRT, and he said, you know, I'm from Chicago. I know all about transit. I know all about congestion, etc. If this is truly for congestion mitigation, then you wouldn't charge a fare. You try and get as many people to the bus as possible, and we know that fares are barriers to that. And I had an aha moment during that discussion, and I was like, Frank, you're right. You're absolutely right. If this is a congestion mitigation issue, having no fare on there will increase ridership, which will reduce congestion. And when we looked at this route, there were options that UDOT had to try and expand the road in this area, but it was very costly. And so UDOT looked at it and said, this expands the life of this corridor, which are mainly state roads, by having this rapid bus transit system. We've had in some instances 15,000 riders a day on some occasions with that. So that's, 15,000 cars that are not on that corridor. So that's a great question, and I was riding in camp before and had that.
Well, what's next? I mean, we put one up to Saratoga, we put one up to Pleasant Hill.
That's a great question as well. And so looking at it, has a budget of like $750 million a year that they receive in sales tax. Gasoline tax, they get some money on that, but it can't go towards transit by the state constitution, but the sales tax can. And so UTA gets about 50 million in fare collection. And then you reduce that down for the cost of collecting, et cetera. For the cost of half of an intersection or interchange, you could fund statewide the transit system without a fare. And the concern is we have a lot of people riding it, and so we have to do a lot of improvements in front. But that's something that the state is discussing the possibility, because it's such a small amount of money, but it could have a huge impact. So, sure.
Yes, just a second ago that you have to hand front. And so my thought is, I believe people along this corridor probably know best about bus routes and free routes and congestion and so forth. I believe people a little bit further south probably know a little bit more about their area down. And so my question would be, and I believe all over, so I think we're all in on this together. Probably kind of steer clear of my town exists, and I'm only going to vote for this item. With Front Runner, I believe extending it to 800 south and Payson goes along with everything you said. I think that also look at 800 south and Payson. Use Google Maps, also says 10,900 south in Utah County. Has an intersection that's headed towards Genola, which will cover West Mountain, Benjamin, and so forth. It also has a railroad track there. It also would service Santa Quin and Payson. And so would this free route, would that in any way hinder from doing another project that I believe is just as important, that makes even further, you talk about buying ground to expand roads and so forth. Right now, that railway exists. Right now, you got lots of townhomes going in. You've got MIT Tech buying ground to put there. What's the possibility of that going to 800 south instead of just quitting just before the edge of the earth?
So I couldn't have teed up a question better than the question you just asked. Sean, you want to address maybe a little bit what we're trying to do with that, the federal infrastructure bills, et cetera?
We were talking before the meeting started, and Mayor Wright's been driving this project along with their files. So the idea is to try to get Front Runner into a position, Front Runner South, from Provo to at least Pace into a position where when we have the federal infrastructure money, it's going to come down to the next that project would be ready to receive half of the funding from the federal government and then half from the local. And so UTA has been very helpful in moving that project along. Mary partner to make trust the answers. So what we want to do is you guys can actually put money on that environmental. 2 weeks ago, Mayor Wright made the motion. Got that money over there. UTA and UTA brought on one of the previous project managers, Steve Meyer, in this program. Steve, he was involved in some of our projects. They brought him out of retirement. He's going to go to work on this.
So bottom line is, we're getting it all teed up and ready to go. We expect substantial funding from the federal government for this additional ready project. That we can use that money very quickly now. Did that answer your question? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So it's serious. It's moving forward.
Another real good reason to have a permanent bank is just paying the bank, 800 southbound. That's enough.
Perfect. Thank you. Yes.
You know, the heartburn for business. Extended amount of time. It's really the UBX or the UBU and the BYU contributions that make it so, you know,
So each school.
providers going to those universities and they have free passes through the universities that pay into the route. So that's really the main thing that makes it really unique.
$2 million a year there that we receive.
What I'd like to emphasize, the front run to a residential, townhomes, stuff like that. Then the free route near the universities, if you have a link from front runner to that.
Yep.
Oh.
Exactly.
And so if that link's finished, then this one becomes more useful. And I think you shouldn't do one without the other because they promote each other. They'll have the ridership. We have the link to them, which will serve further south as well as the university area.
So I think another thing to remember is putting a campus in.
Am I right?
That's a separate one. MTech, Tech College, that's one, and then UVU has some other problems. So they're both looking.
By the time this gets to that point, they will have the campus.
Oh, yeah. But, and then we're hoping, really hard hoping to work to get to that interchange. That funded as well, where, well, MTech down up the, it's a great one about.
Right. Good discussion. Thank you. All right, let's move down to item number 9, action Utah County refinancing of 2012 transportation sales tax bond. I bet you are.
You should. All right, so before you is information, well, depends on. Utah County is looking at refunding the 2012 transportation bond. So the current bond, it was issued in 2012. It was for about 27 years, and it was about $52 million. There's still about $43 million left to pay on that. We pay about $2.5 million a year. There is a big balloon payment near the end, but and we're at a 4% interest rate. That bond was issued to cover these major projects that were done back at the. We didn't fund all of I-15 for it, but we put a lot of money for it. For Pioneer Crossing, again, we put a lot of money for that project. And so that was done back then because it was 4% was actually a good rate back then. So Utah County wants to refinance the bond. The interest rate they can get right now is 2.5%. And so they came to the MPO finance meeting yesterday, and they had different scenarios they were looking at. One was to keep the current 19 years that are left on the current bond and just refinance it. The other was to cut about 2.5 years off and try to get the bond paid off a little bit sooner. And then they also had scenarios they asked, should we use our third quarter cent sales tax funds, which go to build projects that we work through the MPO to fund and select? Should we use either 3 million, 5 million, or 10 million of monies from that account to actually pay the bond down even more, to make it so we don't have to go as far or we don't have to pay as much? So this was the different scenarios that they proposed. And I'm going to really quick do this because this scenario that's outlined in orange and this one here, they are both we pay no contribution from the third quarter since sales tax. It's just, we refinance period and we're done. This was continuing for 19 years, 2039. This one was continuing to 2038 in that scenario. So again, by trying to cut off some years, but by not putting any amounts from from the sales tax monies into it to pay it down, this one really doesn't do much for us, right? We save by keeping it at 39 years. We actually, by refinancing, get about $500,000 a year more to put towards transportation projects. The way that gets the MPO is looking at this. If they cut off about a year, year and a half, it's almost zero what we get for the $1,000. So then in each of these scenarios, 3 million, 5 million, 10 million, the thing that we look at as night staff is over this 19-year period, they're saving 9.3 million to refinance. That's a pretty good deal, right? But if we were to put 3 million or 5 or 10, the savings jump, but we put 3 million into it. So in reality, we go from 9.3 million to 9.8 million by putting $3 million up front. So basically we gained about 500,000 and it took us 19 years to do it. And so at MPO Finance yesterday, we recommended that we not put money toward it and that we either do this or this. Since then, the county has said that they want to move forward with this call. And so again, unless this group wants to put money toward it and you think that this works,
Did you point out? I didn't first.
sorry, this one right here is the one that the county wants to go with. So meaning as we select projects this next year, we're going to have about $3 million more just from the savings of them refinancing to put towards projects.
So did they say why they want to go with column running for the market?
They didn't, assuming that when you're only knocking off basically a year, these gray areas show what years we would get a return. We wouldn't be paying for it. And so in this scenario, they're still making a big balloon payment right at the end and you cut off. So that was
Inflation too. You know, by the time we end up saving that money, who knows how much of that actually will save.
right. You're right. And that was one of our issues was, construction inflation is going up a lot every year now. I think somebody said we're over 10% at the moment in their crazy environment. And so if we're getting 2% turnaround on refinancing, but then we still continue to build projects rather than put 3 or 10 or 5 million into it, it's the better deal.
That's the question. If we do not put the 3, 5, or 10, that will go to current projects. That'll be spent on current projects, which funds it now, instead of pay it down and fund it later.
If paying it down gave us a good outcome, at the end, then we recommend we do it. But in all of these scenarios, we either don't get any return until right at the end, or we never recoup our return and hold the bond.
So ask another question. Don't mean to slow you down, but say $10 million. We have some important projects queued up. That $10 million will make a difference. Like high priority needs.
So we have about 10 million in our balance right now, but we're just starting the selection process for the next 5-year process. So this spring, MPO Tech, and then this group will approve a list of projects, and that 10 million could easily go towards those projects. Or will go towards those projects. So with that, the only thing we had was if you wanted to recommend to the county that we put $3, $5, or $10 million toward paying down the bond, then you would need to do a motion. Other than that, it's a recommendation to the county that they do one of those 2 scenarios that they don't, that we don't put money toward. But as I said, the county is already information that they want to go forward with that first scenario.
Okay. So we need a motion or not?
Or recommendation.
Recommendation. We just need a recommendation.
I'll make a recommendation.
And that's the best recommendation you may not know. Oh, that's why it's the best. We got a motion by Johnson, a second by Hunter Child. All in favor, say aye. Perfect. All right, we'll go down to 10, update report, Federal Highway Administration, Kelly.
I don't have anything. Thanks.
We like those recommendations. Yeah, all right, now I'm gonna add in something right here. We've got Clay from Mayor, or from Congressman, no, Senator Romney's office. I've known Clay for a long time, so take it away, Clay.
Okay, I'll jump in here first, and I've been asked to not get political or campaign, so if
Thank you.
anyone has any questions, I'll stick around till after the meeting and we can talk about that then. But I just want to tell you what's in this infrastructure bill and dispel maybe some of the myths that are out there.
You know,
Yeah, believe it or not, a few of us do. It's been worked on since May. And a lot of people saying, oh, I haven't had a chance to read the bill. Well, it's been out there if you wanted to be a part of the process. Okay, so the first thing I'd note is that there won't be any additional printing out of money for this bill. They're saying 1.2 trillion. 500 billion of that comes from what they were going to pass as their transportation funding for the next 5 years anyways. There's only a portion of it, about 570 billion of new funding, and all of the money to pay for that is going to be repurposed from what wasn't spent on the CARES Act. So this is an additional funding from what already hasn't been authorized. It authorizes $3 billion specifically for Utah on our roads and highways, and that'll go straight to the state, and then there will be a kind of a competition. And then there were priorities the Senate specifically worked on the Smart Intersection Act. I don't know if everybody's aware what a smart intersection is, but you go up to a stoplight. You're the only one there at midnight. It's red for 5 minutes and then you get to go. It's got sensors in it. It notices when people are at what intersection, and then it changes the lights according to that. And it'll provide money to municipalities for those. The Wildfire Mitigation and Management creates a commission to make recommendations based on a federal commission that looks into the policies, and then the recommendations are made to Congress, and then Congress passes the bills at a simple majority vote. It doesn't require the 60 votes. And there will be members of that commission, some feds, some state, and then a lot of local and regular citizens. It secures additional funding for wildfire management and mitigation. And I'll just skip down there to the emergency watershed program. Think Payson, Elk Ridge, Woodland Hills, Spanish Fork, Mapleton. Whenever there's a big burn area, this is the program that goes to fund the after effect to prevent mudslides. It replants the vegetation. They have sprays so that there aren't any new mudslides, and it helps protect the cities and counties. 50 million for the Central Utah project. That's all your secondary water county and other places on the Wasatch Front. 500 million for WAPA for drought relief shortfalls. 100 billion for drought contingency plan funding. 1 billion for the BRIC program, which is used for disasters. If you've ever had to use BRIC, I'm sorry, but it's necessary for the Intermountain West for flooding, wildfires, and things like that. 214 million for the Navajo water rights settlement. 1.7 billion for tribal health services. 219 million for water revolving funds. I know a lot of cities in the county are working on they're trying to get wastewater facilities going, drinking water facilities. This is all going to be just for the state of Utah. It'll invest 1.8 million federal grants through the FAA. That could be any airport in Utah. It'll be a competitive grant process. 65 billion to expand broadband. There are still a lot of places in Utah County that this can still be applied to, especially on the south end of the county. It eliminates a bunch of the NEPA processes and makes it so that once this money is appropriated, you should be able to get through the environmental a lot easier than you have in the past. And then it provides 40 billion in funding for bridges and maintenance and repair. And I heard something about bridges tonight, so something to think about there. And then we talked about rail and transit. That isn't on here, but there's 39 billion for that across the country. And that's what's in the bill. To be short, it's about 1,000 pages, but happy.
Can you read every page?
Nearly.
Okay, thank you.
I fell asleep in the definition section. But
So if you have 219 million to Utah for water, and say your city's in the middle of building a water storage tank, will that money be available for a current project going on, or only for future projects?
I'm thinking only for future projects.
You find out, because we're like, Goshen's in the middle of that too. So $4 million to do ours in Goshen, that's unheard of, you know, with 40-year loan, we're like, just stretching the oblivion.
Yeah, let me
Really know those kinds of things.
look into that.
Well, in Orem, we're starting a water project. We haven't turned ground on it yet. Probably will within 3 or 4 or 5 months. So that would make a big difference as to if we get money here or not as to when we do it.
Okay. I'll look into
Because
that.
it's a $45 million project.
Right. Any other questions?
Yeah. Should I send it to Sean?
Yeah, send it to-
We haven't, it'll be on our website.
Will you send those out to each of us?
I'll email the committee.
Some of us don't go on your website. That'd be great. Hey, thanks. Good seeing you again.
You too.
Come again when you're in town.
I'll stick around.
Good deal. All right, let's move down to Utah Department of Transportation, Mr. Jim.
I haven't had any meetings in July, so there's nothing I'm gonna report. We have our transportation meeting next week. So
Right.
that'll have
You got my vote. Nice job. All right, UTA, Jeff. Great, and thank you. Appreciate that. All right, any other business? No other business?
Thank you, Rob. Virtually,
Yeah.
for his sole response whenever I've interacted.
Thanks, Rob. Shout out to you. All right, our next meeting will be September 2nd. Same bat station, same bat time. I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So second.
A lot of them. Oh, yeah, give it to Mayor Bruns because he got, yeah, Mayor second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Thank you so much for being here. Drive safe.